got Joe Holberg, candidate for 58th mayor of Chicago, former founder and CEO of Spring, and educator.
What promise are you excited to make everyone in Chicago?
It is about helping people get set up and working towards and ultimately achieving their version of the American dream. It's different for everyone. And right now, we are chronically in debt to an irresponsible and unsustainable degree. It's crazy to me that we're not focusing on all of the people.
Tell us more about Spring. So what was Spring when you initially started?
Started Spring really because I was realizing that other people had a lack of financial education, just like I did. Became painfully obvious was everyone wanted it. So I want to scale this to essentially the 95% of people in the United States that don't have $1 million. I am not a politician, and I don't want to be one. I just want to be public servant. We need the city to make its citizens successful.
Fondo.com, the all-in-one accounting platform for startups. Get your bookkeeping done, your taxes filed, and cash back from the IRS. The average startup gets $21,000 back every year. Fondo.com. Welcome back to the Startup Growth Podcast. I think this is our first time meeting in person, is it? Or maybe the second?
I think it's our second.
Yeah. Okay.
We had like
we were much younger back then.
Yeah, we were. We won't say the year.
But it's really great to see you again.
Yeah,
really appreciate you coming on, and I'm excited to talk to you about just your life and your journey and what's coming up with Joe for Chicago. So let's just start. Like, how did you get into entrepreneurship? Because I would love to hear, just a little bit more about your origin story growing up and when you got into helping people.
Yeah. Thank you. It's interesting because in retrospect, there were the entrepreneurial seeds. I'll tell you a funny story. When eBay came out, I thought it was this amazing thing. It was so strange, right? You like sent a check or money in the mail. And what I did was I was on student government, and I would order these bulk glow sticks, and I would go around. I get like 1,000 of them for $15, right? And I would go to the football game on Friday nights, and I would sell them for like $3 a glow stick, and like kids bought them, and that's how we like funded our student government. I'd like have like $300 in cash by the end of the night, and so it didn't really hit me at the time, but as I was getting ready to go to college, I was a first generation college student. I got a lot of financial aid, Pell Grant, et cetera. And as I was in college, I ran out of money by the time I got to my senior year, and I was actually homeless. I slept in my car so I could pay for tuition, but I couldn't afford housing. And, when I graduated, Obama was the commencement speaker, which was incredible, right? I was like on the football field. I was crying. I was like, I'm not supposed to be here. And at that moment, I was sort of sitting there, and I was like, I can go work for myself, or I can go work for other people, right? And I felt like I had been given this really great gift of education. And so, I went out and I did AmeriCorps. I was a teacher on the West Side. I went to Google for a couple of years, built a computer science education platform. And when I was at Google, it was like, all right, I could stay here for 30 years and be like employee number 72,900 or whatever. And I was like, no, thanks. So I quit my job. And I started Spring really because I was realizing that other people had a lack of financial education, just like I did. But what really clicked and when the light bulb turned on was when I was talking to people whose parents were lawyers, software engineers, accountants, and they were coming up to me at work and they were saying, hey, Joe, I don't know what a 401k is. I'm not sure if I'm on track to buy a house. Can you help me with my finances? And I learned it out of necessity. But when I realized that everyone else had the same problem, I was like, I'm onto something. Let's do this. So I quit my job at Google. I had about $30,000 in the bank that I had saved. And I was like, if I run out of money, this business is going to fail. And if I don't, then, it'll be successful. And so we never ran out of money. We just kept on growing. So,
and you wrote a book too during this time.
I did.
Can you tell us about the origin for the book?
I technically have written two books. One is much longer. The second one is like a companion book that I wrote on financial justice related to the TED Talk that I did on the same topic. But the first book was just sort of my general personal finance sort of methodology or attitude. And to be honest, the reason I ended up writing this book is because I was selling into HR. And I was in my like early 20s, maybe 24 or 25. And I was going into these meetings with like the chief people officer, the CHRO. And I was saying, hey, you should pay for this benefit as a workplace offering, and you should give it to your employees. And, I think I was young enough where people were like, Joe, you have a really great idea. We like the technology platform, but we can't trust you with our employees' finances. Right. And so I was sitting there and I was like, I need something to build my credibility. And I thought, well, a book will do that. And so I wrote this book and I would take it to sales meetings and I would slide it across the table and people would be like, well, you must be smart. And what they didn't realize was the back 200 pages were all blank. Right? They weren't actually blank. There was stuff there, but it was just this like sort of aura thing where people were like, wow, he wrote a book. That's pretty impressive. I guess we should trust him. And so it was a massive, asset as it related to my ability to sell the platform, and really get some of those early customers. And, wow. It was just one of those necessity things where it was like a problem to solve.
And that's fascinating. That's amazing. So tell us more about Spring. So what was Spring when you initially started?
Spring initially was a individual sort of like direct to consumer offering. You can imagine like a souped up mint.com, right? You went in, you loaded in your data, you pulled it in from your bank account, your credit card, et cetera. You got some analysis. We had a goal setting and tracking platform. We were very outcomes oriented. So we were like, we don't want people to just like read articles or watch videos. You can do that on the internet. What we want to do is help people identify the goals that are important to them. And then we want to help them track and make sure they reach those goals. So almost like digital SMART goals in a sense. And as we were doing it in a direct to consumer offering, what became painfully obvious was everyone wanted it. I mean, we would go in and we'd be like, hey, David, do you want help? And everyone was like, yes. It was like, cool. Do you want to pay $20 a month? And it was like, no. Right. So universal desire, universal rejection, or essentially around the paying point or, the business model. And so I had to reconcile, that originally. And that's where we came up with this idea to essentially turn it into a workplace benefit. And we detached the recipient of the financial education and financial wellness service from the need to pay. And so the companies paid. And as a result, it was free and unbiased and confidential for employees, which at that point, nothing like that had existed in the United States, right? It was assets under management as sort of a wealth model was if you have $1 million, we'll charge you 1%. Financial advisor interacts directly with client. But we were sitting there and we were like, we want to scale this to essentially the 95% of people in the United States that don't have $1 million that still have the desire to, advance themselves and improve their finances. So we switched from B2C to B2B relatively early on. And that was one of the key mechanisms that allowed us to grow faster.
Wow, that's incredible. So how long did you work on Spring, and how many users did you ultimately have that you were helping save money for buying a car, paying for their kids' college, saving for retirement? You had some pretty big impact with Spring. Can you tell us more about that journey?
Yeah. It's, and I love being out in San Francisco because it's just like electric, right? And I think this is important to touch on at some point related to Chicago's startup and venture ecosystem. Like we have so many amazing things going on in Chicago. But a lot of times we struggle to really jump over that next bridge, whether it's sort of like a larger Series A or a Series B. And so we ended up having a really interesting journey where I did start in 2015. And so that's really when the company began. However, I took a bootstrapping approach, which I think in retrospect, I would have like gone for venture capital a lot sooner had I understood it or been exposed to it a little more. And so we ended up raising, it was just me for 3 years until 2018. And I was like grinding. I mean, like I didn't have a mattress. I was sleeping on the floor. It was like a big deal when I got a microwave. I was like, all right, I can eat, something that's not room temperature. Right. And so when we raised $1 million in 2018, all the VCs were like, all right, who developed your website? And I was like, I did. And they were like, who does sales? I was like, I do. And they were like, okay, who runs the business? And I was like, I do. And they were perplexed because on one hand, that signals a lot of risk, right? Solo founder, non-technical by background, but sort of like cobbling this thing together. And on the other hand, it was incredible that I was able to get that far, just by myself. And so, in 2018, we raised money. We started to grow. We ended up becoming the top rated financial wellness platform in the United States for 3 years in a row. And there are some much larger, what I would have considered sort of complements or competitors, depending on how you frame it, in the Bay Area that ended up raising about 30 times more than us. And they couldn't unseat us from the top rating. And so we ended up having over 25,000 users. Which on one hand is incredibly large. And on the other hand, I always had this sort of like vision of like, this is going to be accessible to 100% of US employees and get to, 100 million people. And so I've had to sort of reconcile that as in my own sort of like, startup and entrepreneurship journey. Like, what is success? Mm-hmm. Like people are like, Joe, you're so successful. And I'm like, yeah, but not really. Mm-hmm. You had these aspirations to grow something much larger. But I sort of got to the place in 2023 when a company actually reached out to us on LinkedIn. It was pretty insane. I was just like sitting there one day and like the little blue light went off. And, in more or less, they were like, we want to acquire your company. I thought it was like a Nigerian prince scam. I was like, this doesn't feel right. And I looked them up and they were one of the largest wealth managers in the United States. It's Mariner Wealth Advisors out of the Kansas City area. I hopped on the phone, got to know them. Great culture fit, great alignment, great vision about expanding and serving more people. Can't say enough positive things about them. And after, a couple of months, we mutually agreed and they acquired the company. And so, wow. It was about an 8-year journey from founding to exit. And then I stayed there until early 2025 this year. So I had essentially a decade in personal finance and financial wellness.
Wow. And you sort of have sat on every side of the table as a founder, as a bootstrap founder, a venture-backed founder, an acquired founder, went to work at the acquirer. What were some key moments for you that you sort of had an aha moment along the journey? One
of the aha moments, this is an interesting one. I was really fretting about this as we were really trying to figure out the pricing model for the wellness benefit. I was looking at all these companies. Some were pay per use, pay per interaction. Some were just blanket, what they call price per employee per month, PEPM in the benefit space. And I had this aha moment where I realized that pricing is not some science. It's literally just something a lot of times you have to decide and then you just have to own it. And so you just have to sort of say, this is what it is. And we ended up being able to both disqualify potential prospects who were not interested in having choices around price, which I sort of had a thesis around. I was like, if I give people choice, they're going to feel more comfortable about buying it. And then it really accelerated highly qualified prospects, right? Because they were like, okay, we can do the math. We understand the cost. We can understand the value that's created. And we believe the value is going to be higher than the cost. And so whereas we were attempting to give everyone choices and to be like, well, there's something for everyone, that actually hampered the ability for companies to make decisions as to whether or not they wanted to use the benefit. And when we tightened it down and just sort of picked a lane, our sales accelerated pretty significantly.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just like one of those things you don't really think about or learn in a formal setting, I suppose. But that was a really positive takeaway for our business. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And okay, so fast forward a little bit, you become a VC, you get more involved in your local community. When did you have the idea that you wanted to help build the next generation of Chicago?
Yeah, when you go all the way back, when you start to think about that life experience, right? Coming from rural Michigan, Chicago's one of the largest cities. My town was very homogenous from a sort of like a community perspective, both racially, socioeconomically, et cetera. Chicago's incredibly diverse. And you look at some of those things in that, early period where, I had to navigate filling out food stamp forms, like and going and interviewing to convince somebody that you need food. Right. And they're looking at you in the office and they're sort of staring down their spectacles saying, I don't know if I believe that you need or deserve support. And then sort of navigating through all of those things, where it's like being a teacher on the West Side, seeing families who just had an immense desire to support their kids in their educational journeys, but being hampered by the realities of maybe not having stable or, high enough income. And then you start to get in the startup side. You see the other parts of society where people have resources to invest. And then as I, sold the company, I went from homeless to never needing to work again in the span of about 15 years. And the fact that I've gone across that spectrum and can understand multiple vantage points, I'm sitting there and I'm like, we need people in positions of leadership, not only in Chicago, but nationally. We need people who are empathetic and understand what people are going through. And unfortunately, especially in a place like Chicago, there's a lot of sort of like parochial or established political class individuals. And you don't have that diversity of experience or that diversity of maybe understanding or working in communities across the city. And so when I started talking to people much earlier this year, I was like, it's been 100 years approximately since we've had a mayor that was a business owner, right? We are moving in a direction where, our city's population is declining and we have a disaster unfolding right in front of our eyes as it relates to public finances at the city level and some other dimensions. And I was like, I think we can do better. And I think we can do better by putting aside the politics and really focusing on people and solutions. And over the last 10 to 15 years, as we've become more polarized and divided as a country on the extremes, that message started to resonate with people. It was like, yeah, let's work together. Let's focus on solutions. Let's think about the future, right? I had started building some artificial intelligence technology when I was, after we were acquired. And I just got to the place where I was like, this is going to radically change how we approach building our country, our economy, and our society. And maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, maybe in 20 years, it's unclear. But what's clear is you can't have elected individuals that actually don't understand the basics of technology. I don't know if you remember that Senate hearing when Mark Zuckerberg was sitting there getting grilled, and one of the senators repeatedly asked him, and this was recently, how do you make money? And he was like, ads, right? There's like the internet memes and stuff out there. And they were so confused, and they were like, yes, we understand ads, but how do you actually make money? And he leans forward again. He's like, ads. It's like, you can't design a government and laws and legislation around, important topics that influence people's lives if you don't have a basic understanding. Now, there's people in government, of course, that understand some technology, but as somebody who's actually like used artificial intelligence to build solutions, has learned about it theoretically and practically, and then also, managed. I won't purport myself to be a software engineer, but, somebody who has worked with and collaborated with software engineers and product people and user research, you're like, these lessons about how we can take these principles, both from, technology as well as business in general. They offer some, forward paths that I don't think a lot of these cities or townships or municipalities have really explored.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry for the long answer.
I love it. That's great. So how does, as a, political outsider, right? I don't know anything about the system other than, what is on the news or what's on Twitter. What has it been like to, and tell me more about your background in politics.
Mm-hmm.
What has it been like entering this space as a solution, as someone trying to find and build solutions? Like, what is it like? What is politics like, Joe?
Yeah. It's really interesting. My background in politics is like technically in high school, they sent out the ballots to like homeroom, and like I opened it up just like everyone else, and my name was on the list, and I was like, that's weird. How did that happen? Right. And everyone else was out like running around campaigning and stuff. And I guess enough people were like, yeah, Joe should probably like do this. It was like incredibly humbling. But I think that's representative of what's happening here, which is like, you can engage in politics. I mean, it's one of the beautiful things about democracy, and we take it for granted. But when I decided to really explore it and see if it was viable, I just started asking questions, right? And I think that's what you do every day. That's what entrepreneurs do every day. They sit there and they say, what if? Why? How can I change something? Could I make something better? And by being curious and asking questions and learning rapidly, I got to the place where I realized that a lot of the building the company was very similar to building a political campaign. You're starting with ambiguous ideas. You're asking a lot of questions. You're trying to learn quickly, and you're trying to create something out of nothing. And so I think entrepreneurs and business owners are uniquely positioned to consider participating in politics if that's something that's interesting to them. Because as problem solvers and people that focus on solutions, I think we bring a very different perspective to public service than maybe somebody who's spent 15 to 20 years sort of working their way up. And there's respect in both of these pathways into politics, but it's a novel perspective. It's a new way to approach maybe governing that the city hasn't tried yet. And I think at this time, with the number of challenges we have, it's really important for us to understand that what we've been doing in Chicago and elsewise, it's clearly not working. Right? We've ended up with extremes on the far left and the far right, and we have just torn each other apart for the last 15 years. And I think it's an opportunity to say, we don't need to continue to do this. We can actually work together. We can set aside our ideological differences, and we can focus on moving our society and our people forward. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is a very businessy, sort of startup-y mentality. And it's not a solution, writ large. You have to, take it with a grain of salt. But the more I talked to people, the more they were willing to engage. And so I had to deconstruct this idea that there were like gates. I'll give you an example. I picked up a book, and there was a foreword by some random political guy. I was like, that guy seems pretty interesting. I looked him up on LinkedIn. And it turns out it was Bill Clinton's campaign manager. And I reached out to him cold on LinkedIn, and I made some Ohio State joke because I went to Michigan. I was like, I know it's dangerous for me to reach out to a Buckeye as a Wolverine, but if you're open to it, I'd love to talk to you. And he replied, he was like, I'm going to be in Chicago next week. Sat down for like 90 minutes. He was amazing. He just like knowledge dropped on me. I wrote everything down. And then he said, you know what? I like you. I'm going to introduce you to a bunch of people. He introduced me to 10 people within about 4 days, and it just built this momentum. And all of this momentum has led to the place where I actually am the first and only candidate that has announced that they're running for mayor. And I did it early because I believe people in Chicago deserve to know who is running to represent them. And so I'm exceedingly curious to know why the rest of the candidates are sitting on the sideline. Like, I think they're more concerned with their political careers than they are, saying to Chicago, I want to represent you. I want to work for you. I want to serve you every day.
Wow. That's incredible. So what is the status quo right now for Chicago, and what are you most excited about impacting?
Yeah, the status quo in Chicago has been going on. It depends on who you ask, but I think the most concerning status quo item is that Chicago continues to succeed despite its government, not because of its government. And I think the opportunity to reimagine how the government works for and gets results for the city and its people is one of the fastest ways we can change the status quo and the sort of the perception and reality of what's happening in Chicago. Right now, we have been losing people for about a decade. And this was like sort of a pre-COVID stat, right? We are losing businesses. They are packing up and they are leaving town for one reason or another. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we punish businesses for operating in the city instead of propel them, right? And I think cities like, you look at Austin, you look at San Francisco, even New York, like these are environments where the government's there. They understand that the health and the job market is intimately related to the business community. It's not the only thing. You need churches, you need, civil society, you need people in philanthropy, you need communities, you need all of these aspects. But Chicago's incredibly unique because we have a current mayor who is demonizing and driving out business rather than saying, let's work together and collaborate so that we can advance our shared goals. It's like it's an adversarial attack rather than a collaborative approach. And it's baffling to me because when companies leave, they take their jobs with them, and there's less opportunities for people in Chicago, whereas we need more opportunities for people. So that's something that I think I want to work towards. I want to say to people, let's have a positive viewpoint of each other, and let's bring our strengths to the table so that we can identify and work towards shared goals rather than sort of creating these like fiefdoms and these territories and these mindsets and narratives about how we're so different and how, something you create and you gain from is my loss. It's like the zero sum game mentality it's so petty and it's so incorrect that we just have to change it or our entire city will continue to decline.
And how does government work at the, municipality city level? What is the mayor's role in building a city?
Yeah, the city of Chicago is interesting because we have one of the largest numbers of city council members given our population. We call them aldermen. And so it's sort of a unique term, and so the mayor traditionally has sort of been able to have these areas that they're directly responsible for, transit, schools, municipal deployment of funds for infrastructure. And they've had this relationship with city council. And the nature of this relationship has actually changed pretty significantly after the Daley years, the two Daleys, both named Richard, M and J. They were mayors for 50 out of like the previous maybe 60 years. It was like one of them for 25, then there was like maybe a 6 or 7 year break, and then the other one picked up the mantle for another 25 years. And so Chicago got used to the mayor being like this just huge stick, huge megaphone, massive bully pulpit. And in the last 10 to 15 years, over the last 2 to 3 mayors, city council has actually sort of emerged as having a little more independence. And I actually think that's a good thing for democracy and for people in Chicago, because instead of just sort of going along with the mayor's office, city council is sitting there and saying, hey, maybe we should actually have some introspection. Maybe we should think about these situations. And one of the greatest examples is the Chicago public school system, for the first time in 30 years, is actually moving towards an independently elected school board versus the mayor appointing the school board. And I think people are concerned. They're thinking about it in a critical way. They're skeptical. I think there's some hope. I think there's some real opportunities. But at the end of the day, the mayor needs to get stuff done, basic things, right? Make sure the lights are on, the streets work, garbage gets cleaned up, and then they can go to the aspirational level of like, how should we drive our city towards this, future? And I think we need to take a hard look at, things like climate change, population density, housing. We don't have enough housing in Chicago. We're a very large geography, much larger than the physical footprint of sort of the peninsulas in SF in New York. But we're not building enough housing. And so you're seeing lots of rent and the prices of housing go up, which of course, if you're buying and selling homes, that's good, from an asset price appreciation. But it ends up really squeezing out home ownership as an accessible pathway, which makes people feel like the city is less affordable and less viable. And so the mayor's got their hands in a lot of things. The aldermen are super important, and collaborating with them, and then also collaborating with these sort of independent government agencies like the CPS, like Chicago Transit Authority, et cetera. So
wow,
that's the wonk answer. That's the Elizabeth Warren, detailed policies.
It's great to hear that perspective. Yeah. So what should, constituents, what expectations should the constituents of Chicago have for their mayor? Yeah. How should people think about who they want their next mayor to be?
My hope is that the citizens and the constituents, the voters, I hope that they want somebody that gets solutions. We need to move the ball downfield. And right now we are going back to that status quo question. We are log jammed. Chicago has one of the slowest new housing building rates of any major city in the United States. We are making it so hard for average families to live in, to work, and to succeed in Chicago. And so my message is we need great ideas. We need collaborative leadership rather than sort of the parochial established, jockeying for these tiny little slices of power. We need to work together and identify where we want to go for the city. And so if it's about a vision, ideas, and getting results, that's going to be a win if the conversation around this election can be about those things. If it's about pedigree, if it's about history, if it's about who knows who, that's not good for Chicago. We need to talk about our ambitions together as a city.
So there's different citizens of Chicago, right? You have the business builders, you have the employees and the family, people building community and families. What should they aspire to? What promise are you excited to make everyone in Chicago?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think at the end of the day, it's about, and this goes back to Spring, the company. It is about helping people get set up and working towards and ultimately achieving their version of the American dream. It's different for everyone, right? But the city itself needs to be a facilitator and an accelerant of people's success. That some people are business owners, some people are teachers, some people are firefighters and police, but we need the city to make its citizens successful. And right now, we are chronically in debt to an irresponsible and unsustainable degree. We have a mayor who refuses to take a look at cost savings and cost efficiency mechanisms and only is concerned with raising revenue. And when you raise revenue, you're making it more expensive for a Black single mom on the South and the West Side, a Latino small business owner in Little Village, and a white person on the lakefront. And it's really hard to come up with policies that piss off all the people in Chicago And our current mayor is doing that every single day. He is making it less affordable with less opportunity, and he's stifling the growth of the city through ideas that just are not supported by reality. And I'll give you an example. Last year, he essentially said, "I would like to take out a $700 million loan." And everyone said, "What for?" He said, "I'm not sure. I just want it." I said, "Okay. How are we going to pay for it?" "We're not going to pay for it. It's going to be an interest-only loan. We're going to let the next generation of people figure it out." And instantaneously, everyone in the city was like, "No, like we can't just take out almost $1 billion of loan for no ascribed reason." And fortunately, it got shot down. But that's an example of making it harder for a coffee barista and a startup entrepreneur. When your taxes continue to get higher, your affordability and your ability to build your own life goes down. And so it's crazy to me that we're not focusing on all of the people, white, black, brown, purple, yellow. Like we're stepping on their necks and making it hard to live in Chicago.
Well, where can we find you?
All the social medias is Joe for Chicago. So hop on there, follow, comment, tweet, repost. I'm sounding like a, curmudgeonly old man. I got enough gray hair to sort of hide my young age. So social media is huge. Like, look, the other thing about this that's really important for people to understand from sort of like, I'm doing my life and government. Sometimes I think about it. Sometimes I don't. What's really important to understand is this is a dark horse campaign. This is David versus Goliath, right? And the way that I am building this campaign is by talking to real people every day. I am not going to the powers that be and saying, "I will represent your interest to the detriment of the many, so please give me money," right? Most of the campaigns and individuals that are considering running are from an established political class that have cut deals in dark rooms for the last 20 years to amass political power. I am not a politician, and I don't want to be one. I just want to be a public servant. And I think the best way to do that, it's a long-winded way, to say, I need $50 from everyone. I need $100 from everyone, because I'm going up against the people that are getting $40,000 checks from special interest groups that are hamstringing the government and taking away opportunities for everyday people. And so, if you got $25, $50, $100, it's a campaign built by and for people. JoeForChicago.com, @JoeForChicago. Fortunately, there's not a lot of Holbergs. I've never met one I'm not related to. And so if you type in Joe Holberg, you're gonna find it. Maybe you'll find my book on Amazon. Please don't buy it. Amazon. It's $15 and I get like $1.50. So I don't know where the rest of it goes. It goes into Jeff Bezos's pocket. But, go to the campaign website. Definitely would appreciate it. And can't thank you enough for having me on.
Thanks so much, Joe. Awesome to have you.
Yeah, for sure.
Fondo.com, the all-in-one accounting platform for startups.